The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of North Ridge High School, its warmth contrasting sharply with the brisk chill of the autumn air outside. Students shuffled into Mr. Gaines's history classroom, their chatter and laughter fading as they took their seats. The walls were adorned with faded posters of historical figures and mottos like, "Knowledge is power," though the room itself felt anything but welcoming. Mr. Gaines, a man in his late 50s, stood rigidly at his desk. His graying hair was combed back meticulously, and his wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose. He scanned the room with an expression of mild irritation, a man who seemed perpetually unimpressed with the world around him. His reputation as a no-nonsense, old-school teacher preceded him, but so did whispers about his less-than-subtle biases. The door creaked open one last time, and in walked Amara Johnson. She was tall for her age, with dark brown skin that seemed to glow in the sunlight and braids that cascaded down her back. She walked with a quiet confidence, her chin slightly raised, her eyes scanning the room as though she already understood its unspoken rules. Amara wasn't one to shy away from challenges, but she knew when to pick her battles. She found an empty seat in the middle row and slid into it, pulling out a notebook and pen with deliberate care. Mr. Gaines's gaze lingered on her a moment longer than on the others, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Let's get started," he barked, turning to the whiteboard. He scrawled "Reconstruction Era" in bold, jagged letters and began his lecture. At first it seemed like any other class. Mr. Gaines spoke with authority, his voice sharp and clipped, occasionally peppering his lecture with questions. But when his gaze fell on Amara, the tone shifted. "Miss Johnson, is it?" he said, squinting at the seating chart. "Yes," Amara replied, meeting his eyes. "Tell us," he said, leaning against his desk with a smirk. "What do you know about Reconstruction? I'm sure you've got some personal insights." The room went silent. A few students exchanged glances, the tension thick in the air. Amara didn't flinch. "Well," she began, her voice steady. "Reconstruction was a complex period aimed at rebuilding the South after the Civil War. It involved efforts to integrate formerly enslaved people into society as citizens with rights, though it faced significant backlash through systemic racism, including Jim Crow laws and violent groups like the KKK. Her response was clear, concise, and delivered with an eloquence that caught some of her classmates off guard. Mr. Gaines's smirk faltered for a split second before he recovered. "Impressive," he said, though his tone dripped with condescension. "Let's hope you can keep up that level of insight for the rest of the semester." The comment stung, but Amara maintained her composure. She had faced these veiled insults before. They weren't new, but they were always exhausting. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Gaines's microaggressions became more frequent. He would nitpick Amara's answers, often interrupting her to correct her points, even when she was clearly right. He would call on her disproportionately, his questions phrased in ways that felt more like traps than genuine inquiries. "Amara," he said one day, his voice laced with mock curiosity, "can you tell us why you think so many people opposed Reconstruction? Surely you have a unique perspective on that." Amara took a deep breath, her fingers gripping her pen tightly. She wanted to retort, to call him out, but she knew that wasn't the way. Instead, she calmly explained the economic and social fears that fueled opposition to Reconstruction, framing her answer in academic terms that left no room for rebuttal. Her classmates began to notice. At first, they were silent observers, unsure of how to react. But as Mr. Gaines's behavior escalated, some of them started to voice their discomfort. During group discussions, a few students would nod encouragingly when Amara spoke. Others would mutter under their breath when Mr. Gaines made another cutting remark. "Why is he always on her case?" one student whispered to a friend after class. "I don't know," the friend replied, "but it's messed up." What Mr. Gaines didn't know was that Amara was far from an ordinary student. Her mother, Lydia Johnson, was a prominent civil rights attorney who had won several high-profile cases against racial discrimination. Her father, Dr. Malcolm Johnson, was a professor of African American studies and a published author. At home, Amara had grown up surrounded by books, debates, and stories of resilience. She was more prepared for this battle than Mr. Gaines could ever imagine, but Amara hadn't told anyone about her parents. She wanted to handle this on her own. to prove that she could stand up to injustice without relying on their reputations. Still, she knew she had an ace up her sleeve if things got out of hand. The breaking point came during a class presentation. Students had been assigned topics related to the civil rights movement, and Amara had chosen the March on Washington. She delivered her presentation with passion and precision, her words painting a vivid picture of the struggles and triumphs of the era. When she finished, the room erupted into applause, except for Mr. Gaines. "Well," he said, his tone icy, "that was adequate. But next time, try to focus more on the broader historical context instead of personal narratives." Amara's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. The applause died down, replaced by a heavy silence. For the first time, Amara felt the weight of her classmates' eyes on her. They weren't just watching her, they were watching him. Northridge High School was an unremarkable building on the outside, its brick walls and manicured lawns blending seamlessly into the middle-class suburbs surrounding it. Inside, however, the school was a microcosm of larger societal tensions. Students of different races, economic backgrounds, and aspirations shared hallways, yet their interactions often mirrored the unspoken divisions of the outside world. The faculty, too, reflected these dynamics. Mr. Gaines was emblematic of a fading generation of teachers who clung to their outdated worldviews under the guise of traditional values. He viewed himself as a purveyor of discipline and order, but his methods often masked a deeper prejudice. His disdain for Amara was not just about her intelligence or confidence. It was about what she represented, a challenge to the status quo he held dear. Amara, on the other hand, carried herself with a poise that belied her age. At home, she had grown up in a household that valued education and resilience. Her mother, Amara Johnson, was a formidable woman who had built her career fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. With her sharp suits, precise diction, and unflinching resolve, Lydia was a force to be reckoned with both in and out of the courtroom. Amara's father, Malcolm, balanced Lydia's intensity with a quiet strength. As a professor, he had dedicated his life to educating others about the contributions and struggles of Black Americans. His office at home was lined with shelves of books on history, philosophy, and sociology, their spines worn from years of use. He often invited Amara into his study to discuss the ideas within, encouraging her to think critically and speak confidently. Their parenting style had cultivated in Amara a sense of self-worth that no amount of prejudice could shake. Still, they had also prepared her for the reality that she would face challenges simply because of who she was. "You're going to encounter people who will try to diminish you," her mother had once told her during a late-night conversation. "Not because of anything you've done, but because of the fears and insecurities they carry. Your job isn't to prove them wrong, it's to rise above them." Amara carried those words with her every day. At school, her peers began to notice her in ways they hadn't before. She wasn't the loudest student in the room, nor the most socially outgoing, but her quiet confidence drew people in. During group projects, her classmates found themselves impressed by her insight and leadership. In conversations, her words often carried a weight that made others pause and think. Among those classmates was Emma Parker, a white girl who sat a few rows behind Amara. Emma had always admired Amara from afar, though she had never spoken up in her defense during Mr. Gaines's targeted remarks. Emma wasn't necessarily afraid, she just didn't know what to say. But the more she witnessed, the more unsettled she became. One day after class, Emma approached Amara. "Hey," she began, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "I just wanted to say your presentation was amazing. Really. Thanks," Amara replied, her smile warm but cautious. I think the way Mr. Gaines talks to you is really unfair," Emma added, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara studied her for a moment before replying. "It is, but I'm used to it." Emma frowned. "You shouldn't have to be." From that day on, Emma began to speak up, albeit hesitantly at first. When Mr. Gaines interrupted Amara or made a snide comment, Emma would glance around the room, silently encouraging others to notice. Meanwhile, Amara continued to hold her ground. She refused to let Mr. Gaines's behavior define her experience, even as he ramped up his antagonism. During one particularly heated class discussion, he attempted to undermine her argument by questioning her sources. Amara calmly listed her references, citing books she had borrowed from her father's collection and research she had done online. "Perhaps next time, you should consult more credible sources," Mr. Gaines sneered. "I did," Amara shot back, her voice steady but firm. "Perhaps next time you should consider reading them." A murmur of approval rippled through the classroom, and Mr. Gaines's face flushed. The small acts of defiance began to snowball. Other students, emboldened by Amara's courage and Emma's growing support, started to call out Mr. Gaines's behavior. In the hallways and during lunch breaks, conversations about his actions began to circulate. "Why does he hate her so much?" one student asked. "I don't know," another replied, "but he's wrong for it." Outside the school, Amara's parents began to notice changes in her demeanor. She was still composed, but there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Lydia sat her daughter down. "Talk to me," Lydia said, her voice gentle. Amara hesitated, then recounted everything: Mr. Gaines's comments, the way he singled her out, and the subtle yet persistent attempts to undermine her. Lydia listened intently, her expression a mix of anger and resolve. "You've done an incredible job handling this on your own," she said when Amara finished. "But it's time we stepped in." Amara nodded, her relief palpable. The next day, Lydia and Malcolm requested a meeting with the principal. They came armed with detailed accounts of Mr. Gaines's behavior, as well as testimonies from Amara and a few brave students who had come forward. The principal, a young and progressive leader, was appalled by what he heard and assured them he would take immediate action. Unaware of what was brewing, Mr. Gaines continued as usual, confident in his authority. But cracks were beginning to form in his carefully constructed facade. The cracks in Mr. Gaines's authority widened as the tension in his classroom became impossible to ignore. Rumors of the meeting between Amara's parents and the principal began to circulate among the students, though no one knew the details. Meanwhile, Amara continued to maintain her composure, even as the stakes rose. During one class, Mr. Gaines distributed an assignment on civil rights-era speeches, asking each student to analyze the rhetorical strategies of a selected leader. When he handed Amara her assignment, she noticed that her topic was Malcolm X's "The Ballot or the Bullet," a speech widely regarded as confrontational in tone. "Of course you'll find this one relatable," Mr. Gaines said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Amara raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure I will," she replied evenly. In her presentation, Amara not only dissected the rhetorical devices used by Malcolm X, but also provided historical context, explaining how his speech addressed systemic disenfranchisement. Her analysis was thorough, balanced, and deeply insightful. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment before a student in the back began to clap. Soon, others joined in, their applause echoing in the room. Mr. Gaines's face tightened, but he said nothing. After class, Emma caught up with Amara in the hallway. "That was amazing," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "Thanks," Amara replied, her smile faint. But it's not over. The tide began to turn as more students came forward with stories of Mr. Gaines's discriminatory behavior. A group of them, led by Emma and a boy named Carlos, drafted a letter to the school administration detailing their experiences and demanding action. The letter garnered dozens of signatures, including those of students who had previously remained silent. Meanwhile, the principal conducted an investigation, interviewing students, parents, and faculty members. It became clear that Mr. Gaines's behavior was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that spanned years. His former students shared similar stories of subtle, racially charged comments and differential treatment, though few had spoken up at the time. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Mr. Gaines remained defiant. During a staff meeting, he dismissed the allegations as overblown and accused his critics of being overly sensitive. "I've been teaching for 30 years, he said. "I know how to run my classroom." But his confidence began to waver when he was called into the principal's office for a formal discussion. Sitting across from the principal and Amara's parents, Mr. Gaines found himself on the defensive as Lydia calmly but firmly laid out the case against him. "This isn't about one or two isolated incidents," Lydia said, her tone measured but resolute. "This is about a pattern of behavior that undermines the very principles of equity and education you're supposed to uphold." The principal nodded in agreement, his expression grave. "Mr. Gaines, this school values inclusivity and respect. Your actions have not reflected those values." Faced with the prospect of disciplinary action, Mr. Gaines tried to deflect responsibility, blaming his behavior on misunderstandings and generational differences. But his excuses fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence against him. Amara, meanwhile, continued to focus on her studies and her growing network of allies. She refused to let Mr. Gaines's behavior derail her education or her sense of self-worth. Her classmates admired her resilience, and many began to see her as a leader in their own right. One afternoon, as she was leaving school, Amara was approached by a younger student, a freshman named Jasmine. "Hi," Jasmine said, her voice hesitant. "I just wanted to say thank you for standing up to Mr. Gaines. It means a lot." Amara smiled, touched by the girl's words. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "But remember, it's not just me. We all have a voice. Don't be afraid to use yours." As the investigation progressed, Mr. Gaines's behavior became increasingly erratic. He snapped at students during class, his frustration boiling over in ways that only added to the case against him. Eventually, the administration made the decision to place him on leave pending further review. The announcement was met with a mix of relief and disbelief among the students. Some felt vindicated, while others were shocked that such a long-standing teacher could face such consequences. For Amara, the news was bittersweet. She knew the fight wasn't over, but it was a step in the right direction. She hoped that her experience would lead to broader changes within the school, ensuring that no student would have to endure what she had faced. As the semester drew to a close, Amara delivered one final presentation in her history class, now taught by a substitute. She chose to focus on the power of collective action, using examples from both historical movements and her own experience at North Ridge High. "When people come together to stand up for what's right," she concluded, "they can create change, even in places where it seems impossible." Her classmates erupted into applause, their admiration for her palpable. Emma and Carlos exchanged proud smiles, knowing they had played a small part in supporting her journey. Outside the classroom, Amara's parents waited for her with warm embraces and words of encouragement. "You've done more than we could have ever imagined," Malcolm said, his voice filled with pride. Lydia nodded, her eyes shining. "You've made a difference, Amara. Never forget that." As the news of Mr. Gaines's suspension spread, it rippled through the North Ridge High community, sparking a range of reactions. Some students and parents expressed relief, feeling it was long overdue. Others, particularly a small group of parents who supported Mr. Gaines's traditional teaching methods, voiced their discontent. One of the most vocal critics was Cynthia Harper, the president of the school's PTA, and a longtime supporter of Mr. Gaines. She called an emergency meeting, rallying parents who believed the accusations were part of a larger overreaction to political correctness. During the meeting, Cynthia stood at the podium in the school auditorium, her voice firm as she addressed the crowd. "Mr. Gaines has been a dedicated educator for decades," she declared. "We cannot allow his reputation to be tarnished by baseless claims. This is an attack on our values as a community." Emma's mother, Sarah Parker, was among the attendees, sitting quietly in the back. She had always admired Cynthia's organizational skills, but had grown uneasy with her increasingly divisive rhetoric. This time, however, Sarah decided to speak up. She stood, her voice clear but measured. "I understand that some of you feel loyal to Mr. Gaines," she began, "but we need to consider the voices of the students who've been directly affected by his behavior. Ignoring their experiences doesn't uphold our community values. It undermines them." Her words were met with murmurs, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged skeptical glances. Meanwhile, within the school, the tension between students who supported Amara and those who sided with Mr. Gaines began to intensify. A small group of students, led by Cynthia's son, Bradley, started spreading rumors about Amara, accusing her of exaggerating her claims for attention. "You think she's some kind of hero?" Bradley sneered during lunch one day. "She's just trying to get famous or something." Emma, overhearing his comment, finally had enough. She stood up from her table and faced him. "Do you even hear yourself?" she said, her voice steady but loud enough to draw attention. "You're blaming Amara for standing up to someone who's been unfair for years. Maybe instead of tearing her down, you should think about why so many people agree with her." Bradley rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath, but he didn't respond further. Emma's outburst earned her nods of approval from nearby students, further isolating Bradley's group. While these tensions simmered, Amara found herself at the center of a new opportunity. The school's student council, inspired by her courage, approached her with a proposal to help lead a new initiative focused on equity and inclusion. The program would include workshops, guest speakers, and a review of school policies to ensure a more supportive environment for all students. Initially hesitant, Amara agreed after discussing it with her parents. She saw it as a chance to create lasting change, not just for herself but for future students. Her first step was to organize a school-wide assembly featuring her father as a guest speaker. Dr. Amara Johnson's presentation was both powerful and accessible, weaving historical context with actionable insights on combating bias in everyday interactions. Change doesn't happen in grand gestures, he told the audience. It happens in the choices we make every day, in what we tolerate, in what we challenge, and in how we treat each other. The assembly was met with widespread praise, even from some who had initially been skeptical of the initiative. As the program gained momentum, Amara began working more closely with Emma, Carlos, and other supportive classmates. They formed a committee to gather student input, ensuring the initiative reflected the needs and concerns of the entire school community. One particularly moving moment came when Jasmine, the shy freshman who had once thanked Amara in the hallway, shared her own story during a workshop. "I've always been afraid to speak up," Jasmine admitted, her voice trembling. "But seeing Amara stand up to Mr. Gaines made me realize that I don't have to stay silent." Her words brought tears to Amara's eyes, reaffirming why she had taken on this fight in the first place. As the initiative progressed, resistance from Mr. Gaines's supporters began to wane. Cynthia Harper's campaign to reinstate him lost momentum as more parents and students came forward with stories corroborating his biased behavior. Even Bradley began to distance himself from his mother's rhetoric, though he never directly apologized to Amara. By the end of the semester, the school had implemented several of the committee's recommendations, including a mandatory diversity training for faculty and the creation of a peer support network for students. For Amara, the journey was far from easy, but it was undeniably rewarding. One evening, as she and Emma worked late in the library finalizing plans for an upcoming event, Emma turned to her. "You've really changed this place," Emma said, her voice filled with admiration. Amara smiled, a mix of pride and humility in her expression. "I couldn't have done it alone," she replied. The two shared a moment of quiet reflection, their friendship having grown stronger through the challenges they had faced together. Outside the school, Amara's story began to gain attention in the local media. A journalist from the town's newspaper interviewed her about the initiative and the events that had led to it. The article, titled "Rising Above: How One Student Sparked Change at North Ridge High," painted a vivid picture of Amara's courage and resilience. Though Amara appreciated the recognition, she remained focused on the work ahead. She knew that true change required ongoing effort, and she was determined to see it through. The new semester began with a sense of renewal at North Ridge High. The initiatives spearheaded by Amara and her peers were gaining traction, and the school felt like it was moving in a positive direction. Yet, beneath the surface, tensions lingered. Some teachers quietly resented the new policies, viewing them as a critique of their long-standing methods, and a few students still grumbled about the unnecessary drama caused by Mr. Gaines's suspension. Amara continued to focus on her studies and leadership role, but the emotional toll was beginning to weigh on her. She had grown used to carrying herself with unwavering strength, but there were moments when the pressure felt overwhelming. One evening, as she worked on a presentation for the student council, she broke down in tears. Her mother found her in the living room, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face. "Amara, what's wrong?" Lydia asked, sitting beside her. "I'm just tired," Amara admitted, wiping her eyes. "It feels like no matter what I do, there's always someone waiting to tear me down." Lydia placed a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You've done so much already," she said gently. "But remember, it's okay to lean on others. You don't have to carry this all by yourself." Her mother's words gave her strength, but the next day brought an unexpected challenge. Mr. Gaines, who had been on leave for weeks, returned to school suddenly. The announcement was made during the morning announcements, catching students and staff alike off guard. "The administration has reviewed the situation thoroughly," the principal explained in a carefully worded statement. While Mr. Gaines will resume teaching, he has agreed to undergo additional training to ensure his practices align with the school's values. The reaction was immediate and polarizing. Some students were outraged, viewing the decision as a betrayal of the progress they had worked so hard to achieve. Others, particularly those who had supported Mr. Gaines from the start, saw it as a vindication. Amara was stunned. She had believed that the evidence against Mr. Gaines was too strong for him to return. Seeing him walk into the building that morning, his posture as rigid and self-assured as ever, felt like a slap in the face. Emma and Carlos found her during lunch, their expressions mirroring her disbelief. "Can they even do this?" Emma asked, her voice brimming with frustration. "They did," Amara replied, her tone flat. "Now we have to figure out what to do next." The first encounter between Mr. Gaines and Amara after his return was tense but revealing. During a discussion on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Mr. Gaines made a pointed remark about the importance of respecting authority in achieving societal change. Amara raised her hand. While respecting authority is important, many of the leaders of the civil rights movement had to challenge unjust authorities to create meaningful progress, she said. Mr. Gaines paused, his expression unreadable. For a moment it seemed like he might lash out, but instead he simply nodded and moved on. It was a small victory, but one that left Amara and her classmates wondering if the mandatory training he'd undergone had softened him, or if he was simply biding his time. Outside of class, the student council held an emergency meeting to address the situation. The group debated whether to escalate their complaints to the school district, or focus on strengthening the existing initiatives. "I think we need to show them that we're not backing down," Carlos argued. "But we can't let this turn into a personal vendetta," Emma countered. "This is about more than just one teacher. It's about the whole system." Amara listened to the discussion, her thoughts swirling. She agreed with both perspectives but felt torn about the best course of action. Finally, she spoke up. "Maybe we should do both," she said. "Keep pushing for systemic change, but also hold Mr. Gaines accountable. If he's really changed, he should have no problem proving it." The group agreed, and they drafted a plan to present to the administration. Their proposal included regular evaluations for all teachers, a student feedback system, and a peer mentorship program to support students who felt marginalized. The proposal was met with mixed reactions from the administration. While the principal was supportive, some faculty members resisted, viewing it as an unnecessary burden. In the weeks that followed, Amara's determination was tested as she faced both subtle pushback and outright hostility. Mr. Gaines, though more subdued than before, still displayed moments of thinly veiled condescension. During one such moment, Amara confronted him after class. "Mr. Gaines," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I know you think I'm just a kid who doesn't know anything, but I want you to understand that I'm not going anywhere. The changes we're making aren't about you. They're about everyone. If you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who needs to learn something." Mr. Gaines stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Amara thought he might respond with another dismissive comment, but instead, he simply nodded and walked away. It wasn't an apology, but it felt like a step toward something different. The return of Mr. Gaines cast a shadow over the progress Amara and her peers had made, but it also became a rallying point. The conflicting reactions among students and faculty revealed the depth of the divide that had always existed, but rarely been openly acknowledged. For Amara, the challenge became less about one teacher and more about sustaining the momentum for systemic change. Her confrontation with Mr. Gaines left her feeling both empowered and frustrated. Though he had nodded in acknowledgement of her words, his behavior in class remained guarded, almost robotic. It was clear that he was walking on eggshells, aware that any misstep could lead to further scrutiny. The student council's proposed initiatives were implemented in phases, starting with the peer mentorship program. Amara volunteered as a mentor, working with younger students like Jasmine, who continued to find her voice. During one session, Jasmine shared a poem she had written about identity and resilience, her words resonating deeply with the group. "It's because of you that I feel like I can write this," Jasmine said, her eyes shining with gratitude. Amara smiled, humbled by the impact she was having. "It's because of you that I keep going," she replied. Meanwhile, the student feedback system was rolled out, allowing students to anonymously rate and comment on their classroom experiences. The results were revealing. While most teachers received positive feedback, Mr. Gaines's evaluations painted a different picture. Several students mentioned that despite his more subdued demeanor, his teaching style remained dismissive and unengaging. The administration took notice, and the principal scheduled another meeting with Mr. Gaines to discuss the feedback. Though he agreed to adjust his approach, it was clear that the situation was reaching a breaking point. Outside the classroom, tensions between students who supported Amara and those who defended Mr. Gaines continued to simmer. One day during lunch, a confrontation erupted when Bradley Harper and a few of his friends cornered Carlos near the vending machines. "You think you're so great standing up for her?" Bradley sneered. "This whole thing is ridiculous. Gaines didn't do anything wrong." Carlos squared his shoulders, refusing to back down. "You think it's ridiculous because it doesn't affect you," he shot back. "But for the rest of us, this stuff matters. Maybe you should try listening for once." The exchange drew a crowd, and before long a teacher intervened to break it up. The incident served as a stark reminder of the lingering divide, but it also solidified the determination of Amara and her allies to keep pushing forward. As the semester progressed, the cultural shift at North Ridge High became more apparent. Teachers began incorporating more diverse perspectives into their lessons, and students who had once felt invisible found their voices amplified. The workshops organized by the Equity Committee were well attended, sparking meaningful conversations that extended beyond the classroom. During one workshop, a white student named Hannah stood up and shared her own journey of unlearning biases. "I used to think racism was just something from the past," she admitted. "But this whole experience has opened my eyes. It's made me realize how much work we still have to do, and how I can be part of that change." Her vulnerability was met with applause, and Amara felt a surge of hope. However, not everyone embraced the changes. Cynthia Harper continued to push back, organizing another PTA meeting to challenge the initiatives. This time, however, her efforts were met with fierce resistance. Parents who had initially stayed silent began to speak out in support of the new policies, sharing their own children's experiences with bias and discrimination. At the meeting, Sarah Parker once again stood to address the crowd. "I used to think these issues didn't affect me or my family," she said, "but seeing what Amara and others have gone through has made me realize that silence is complicity. If we want to create a better future for all our kids, we need to support these changes, not fight them." Her words resonated with many in the room, and by the end of the meeting, Cynthia's influence had waned significantly. For Amara, the most significant moment came during a school assembly, where she was invited to give a speech about the progress the school had made. Standing on the stage, she looked out at the sea of faces, some supportive, others skeptical, but she spoke with unwavering conviction. "This isn't just about me," she began. "It's about all of us. It's about creating a school where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued. Change isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight, but together we've already started something incredible, and I know we can keep going." Her speech was met with a standing ovation, even from some who had initially opposed her efforts. Later that day, as she walked through the hallways, Mr. Gaines approached her. His expression was unreadable, but there was a hint of something softer in his eyes. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice measured, "I wanted to say, your speech was impressive." Amara nodded, her tone polite but distant. "Thank you, Mr. Gaines." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I've been teaching for a long time," he said, "and I've made mistakes. I'm learning, or at least trying to." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging his faults. Amara chose her words carefully. "Learning is the first step," she said. "What matters is what you do next." As Mr. Gaines walked away, Amara felt a sense of closure. She knew he might never fully change, but she also knew she had done everything she could to challenge the system he represented. In the months that followed, the cultural shift at North Ridge High deepened. The programs initiated by Amara and her peers began to take root, influencing not just the school's policies but its overall atmosphere. Students and teachers alike were starting to have conversations they had once avoided, confronting uncomfortable truths with a renewed sense of purpose. Amara's role as a leader grew as she continued to balance her academic responsibilities with her work on the Equity Committee. Though she faced occasional resistance, the overwhelming support from her peers and allies kept her motivated. The mentorship program became a cornerstone of the school's inclusivity efforts, fostering connections between students of different backgrounds. One of the most transformative moments came during a mentorship session, when Jasmine, the freshman Amara had inspired, announced that she was running for student council. "I never thought I could do something like this," Jasmine admitted, her voice filled with emotion. "But seeing you stand up and lead made me believe I could too." Amara's chest swelled with pride. "You can do this," she said, placing a hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "And I'll be here to support you every step of the way." Meanwhile, the student feedback system continued to highlight areas for improvement among the faculty. The results revealed that students appreciated teachers who fostered open dialogue and respected diverse perspectives. This led to additional training sessions for staff, many of whom embraced the opportunity to grow. One of the most surprising developments came from Mr. Gaines. While his initial response to the feedback had been defensive, over time, he began to make subtle changes in his approach. He started to invite more student-led discussions in his classroom, giving his students a platform to share their perspectives. Though he still struggled with his biases, there were moments when he seemed genuinely invested in learning from his mistakes. During one class, he assigned a project on the Reconstruction era, encouraging students to explore how the period's successes and failures still resonated in modern society. When Amara presented her project, analyzing systemic inequalities in education, Mr. Gaines listened intently. "That was insightful," he said after she finished. "You've given me a lot to think about." Amara didn't respond immediately, but she could see the sincerity in his expression. It was a small step, but it felt significant. Outside of school, Amara's story continued to gain attention. Local media outlets highlighted her leadership, and she was invited to speak at community events about her experiences. At one event, hosted by the city's cultural center, she shared the stage with her father, Dr. Amara Johnson. "My father taught me the importance of understanding history," Amara said, addressing the audience. "Not just the history written in textbooks, but the stories of resilience and resistance that shape who we are today. I hope to continue that legacy by creating spaces where everyone's story can be heard." Her words were met with thunderous applause, and afterward, several attendees approached her to express their admiration. Among them was a teacher from a neighboring school who admitted she had been inspired to start a similar initiative with her own students. Back at Northridge High, the changes Amara had fought for began to manifest in subtle but meaningful ways. The halls, once marked by unspoken divisions, now buzzed with a sense of camaraderie. Students who had once stayed in their cliques were now engaging in conversations across social and cultural lines. Emma, who had become one of Amara's closest friends, reflected on the transformation during a lunch break. "Do you ever look around and think, we actually did it?" she asked, her tone filled with wonder. Amara smiled. "We started something," she said, "but there's still more to do." One of the final challenges of the semester came during the school's annual awards ceremony. Amara was nominated for the Principal's Leadership Award, a prestigious recognition given to a student who exemplified excellence in academics and community service. As the principal read her name, the auditorium erupted into applause. Amara walked to the stage, her heart pounding with a mix of pride and humility. "Leadership isn't about standing alone," she said during her acceptance speech. "It's about standing together. This award isn't just for me, it's for everyone who believed in the possibility of change and worked to make it happen." Her words resonated deeply, and as she returned to her seat, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The semester ended on a high note, with the school celebrating its progress during a community open house. Parents, students, and teachers gathered to showcase the initiatives that had been implemented and share their hopes for the future. Amara's father gave a keynote speech, while her mother facilitated a panel discussion on equity in education. For Amara, the event felt like a culmination of everything she had worked toward. As she looked around the room, seeing students and faculty mingling, she felt a sense of fulfillment that was hard to put into words. Later that evening, as she walked home with her parents, her mother turned to her with a proud smile. "You've done something incredible, Amara," Lydia said. You've shown people what's possible when you stand up for what's right. Her father nodded in agreement. This is just the beginning, he added. I can't wait to see what you do next. Amara smiled, her heart brimming with gratitude and determination. She knew her journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. With the school year nearing its end, the changes initiated by Amara and her peers were starting to feel like part of Northridge High's fabric. The student council's initiatives were well received, and the mentorship program flourished. However, the road ahead wasn't without its challenges. As the school prepared for its annual Spring Community Forum, a platform for students, teachers, and parents to discuss issues and propose solutions, a growing divide became apparent. While many celebrated the progress the school had made, a vocal minority continued to resist. Among them was Cynthia Harper, who once again attempted to rally support for her cause. Her message had shifted from defending Mr. Gaines to criticizing the broader changes, claiming they created an environment of division by focusing too heavily on race and equity. Cynthia's rhetoric began to gain traction among some parents, and murmurs of discontent spread through the community. The forum, which had initially been planned as a celebration of progress, now loomed as a potential battleground. Amara and the Equity Committee prepared meticulously for the event. They gathered data on the impact of the initiatives, including testimonials from students and teachers, to showcase their success. But Amara couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. She knew the forum would be a critical moment, one that could solidify their progress or threaten to undo it. On the day of the event, the school auditorium was packed. The principal opened the forum with a brief speech, emphasizing the importance of open dialogue and constructive solutions. Then, the floor was turned over to the participants. Amara and Carlos were among the first to present, highlighting the mentorship program's success. Carlos shared a story about a mentee who had transformed from a struggling student into a confident leader, crediting the program for the change. This is what happens when we create spaces for students to support each other, Carlos concluded, his voice steady and passionate. It's not just about policies, it's about people. Their presentation was met with applause, but as Amara sat back down, she noticed Cynthia Harper standing near the microphone. When Cynthia began to speak, her tone was measured but pointed. I think we can all agree that supporting students is important, she said. But I have concerns about the way these initiatives have been implemented. Focusing so much on race and equity risks dividing our community instead of bringing us together. Shouldn't we be teaching our kids to see each other as equals, not emphasizing their differences? The room grew tense with murmurs rippling through the audience. Amara felt her chest tighten, but she steadied herself, knowing she would need to respond. When Cynthia finished, the principal invited others to share their perspectives. Emma was the first to step forward. With all due respect, Mrs. Harper, Emma said, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength. Acknowledging differences isn't the same as dividing people. Pretending those differences don't exist doesn't solve anything. It just lets the problems continue. Her words were met with scattered applause, and Amara felt a surge of pride. Emma had grown so much since the beginning of the year. As more people spoke, the discussion became a mix of praise, criticism, and calls for compromise. Amara listened intently, taking notes and formulating her response. When it was finally her turn, she walked to the microphone, her heart pounding. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Mrs. Harper, she began, her tone calm but firm. I understand your concerns, but I respectfully disagree. The changes we've made aren't about dividing people. They're about giving everyone the opportunity to succeed. Ignoring inequities doesn't make them go away. It just makes it harder for those affected to speak up. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. These initiatives aren't about blame or guilt. They're about accountability and growth, and the results speak for themselves. Students who once felt invisible now feel seen. Teachers are learning new ways to connect with their classes. This is what progress looks like. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, and by the time she finished, the room erupted into applause. Even some of Cynthia's supporters seemed moved by her words. The forum continued with more speakers, but Amara's speech marked a turning point. By the end of the evening, the overwhelming sentiment was one of support for the initiatives. Cynthia's influence waned further, and the principal publicly reaffirmed the school's commitment to equity and inclusion. As Amara left the auditorium that night, she felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The forum had been a success, but the effort it had taken weighed heavily on her. "Amara!" Jasmine called out, running to catch up with her. "That was amazing. You were amazing." Amara smiled, her exhaustion melting away at the younger girl's enthusiasm. "Thanks, Jasmine. But remember, this is just the beginning. We've still got work to do." The two walked out into the cool night air, the stars overhead a reminder of the vast possibilities that lay ahead. The weeks following the community forum were a whirlwind of activity at North Ridge High. The initiatives championed by Amara and her peers had gained widespread support, and the school began rolling out the final phases of the equity programs. Yet, beneath the surface, tension lingered, as some students and parents remained resistant to change. One Friday morning, an unexpected announcement crackled through the school's intercom system. "All students and staff, please report to the auditorium immediately for an emergency assembly," the principal's voice declared. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as students filed into the large space. Amara took her usual seat near the front, flanked by Emma and Carlos. She glanced at them, her brow furrowed in concern. "What do you think this is about?" Emma whispered. "I don't know," Amara replied, her voice low, "but I've got a bad feeling." The principal stood on the stage, his expression grave. Beside him was a tall man in a dark suit, whom he introduced as Mr. Benson, a representative from the school district. "Good morning, everyone," Mr. Benson began, his tone neutral. "I'm here today to address some recent developments regarding North Ridge High. Over the past year, this school has undergone significant changes, many of which have been positive. However, we've also received complaints about how these changes have been implemented." Amara's stomach sank as murmurs swept through the crowd. "After reviewing the situation, the district has decided to reevaluate certain programs, including the equity initiatives introduced this year," Mr. Benson continued. "Until further notice, these programs will be paused while we conduct a formal review." Gasps erupted from the audience, followed by scattered whispers and exclamations of disbelief. Amara felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under her. She exchanged stunned glances with Emma and Carlos, their expressions mirroring her own shock. "This can't be happening," Carlos muttered. "They can't do this," Emma said, her voice shaking with anger. The principal attempted to calm the crowd, but the tension was palpable. As the assembly ended, students began filing out of the auditorium in a daze, their conversations buzzing with outrage and confusion. Amara remained seated, her mind racing. She had fought so hard for these changes, and now it felt as though everything was slipping away. But even as doubt threatened to overwhelm her, a spark of determination ignited within her. "This isn't over," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. That afternoon, Amara called an emergency meeting of the student council. The room was packed with students who shared her outrage, their faces reflecting a mix of anger and resolve. "We can't let them take this away from us," Carlos said, slamming his fist on the table. "We've worked too hard for this." "But what can we do?" one student asked. "The district has already made its decision." Amara stood at the front of the room, her presence commanding attention. "The district may have made its decision, but we have a voice too," she said. "We're the ones who've been directly affected by these programs. If we don't speak up, who will?" Her words galvanized the group, and they began brainstorming ways to take action. They decided to organize a peaceful demonstration to show their support for the initiatives. The plan was ambitious, a school-wide walkout during the following week. Over the next few days, the students worked tirelessly to spread the word. They created flyers, posted on social media, and held meetings to rally support. The response was overwhelming, with students from all grades pledging to join the demonstration. On the morning of the walkout, the energy in the school was electric. At precisely 10 a.m., hundreds of students stood up from their desks and marched out of the building, gathering on the front lawn with signs and banners. "Equity for all," they chanted, their voices echoing through the crisp morning air. Amara stood at the forefront holding a megaphone. She delivered an impassioned speech about the importance of the initiatives, emphasizing the progress they had made and the need to continue that work. "This isn't just about policies," she declared, her voice ringing out with conviction. "This is about people, about every student who's ever felt overlooked, every teacher who's ever wanted to make a difference, and every person who believes that change is possible." "We will not be silenced." The crowd erupted into cheers, their unity a powerful statement. Local news outlets arrived to cover the demonstration, and footage of the event quickly spread online, drawing attention from the broader community. The walkout lasted for several hours, and by the end of the day, the district office issued a statement acknowledging the students' concerns. Mr. Benson announced that the review process would include input from students, parents, and teachers, ensuring that all voices were heard. Amara felt a wave of relief, but she knew the fight wasn't over. She and her peers continued to advocate for the initiatives, attending district meetings and working tirelessly to ensure their reinstatement. Several weeks later, the district announced its decision. The equity programs would not only be reinstated but expanded to other schools in the area. The announcement was met with celebration, and Amara's efforts were hailed as a turning point for the community. As the school year came to a close, Amara reflected on the journey she had undertaken. She had faced immense challenges, but she had also discovered her strength and the power of collective action. During the final assembly of the year, the principal presented Amara with the school's highest honor, the Leadership Excellence Award. "Amara Johnson has shown us all what it means to lead with courage, conviction, and compassion," he said. "Her efforts have made a lasting impact on our school and our community." As Amara stepped onto the stage to accept the award, the auditorium erupted into a standing ovation. She looked out at the sea of faces, her parents, her friends, her peers, and felt a profound sense of gratitude and hope. This was only the beginning. The final weeks of the school year passed in a blur of activity and celebration. The reinstated equity initiatives continued to thrive, their success now undeniable. Amara and her peers had not only preserved their progress, but also created a ripple effect, inspiring other schools in the district to implement similar programs. For Amara, the experience had been transformative. She had started the year as a quiet student, confident in her abilities but hesitant to draw attention. Now she was a recognized leader, not just within her school, but in the wider community. Her journey had taught her the power of resilience, the importance of allies, and the impact one voice could have when joined by many. During the final day of classes, the atmosphere at Northridge High was jubilant. Students hugged in the hallways, teachers exchanged warm smiles, and the sense of unity was palpable. As Amara walked through the halls, she was stopped constantly by classmates who wanted to thank her, congratulate her, or simply express their admiration. One of the most poignant moments came when Jasmine approached her, holding a small envelope. "I made this for you," Jasmine said, her cheeks flushed. Inside was a handwritten letter and a drawing of Amara standing at a podium, surrounded by a cheering crowd. The caption read, "My hero." Amara's throat tightened as she read the letter, which detailed how much Jasmine had grown because of her mentorship and example. "Thank you, Jasmine," Amara said, pulling her into a hug. "You're going to do incredible things. I know it." That evening, the school held a celebratory assembly to honor the achievements of the year. Amara sat with her parents, who beamed with pride as the principal gave a speech, acknowledging the progress the school had made. "We have faced challenges this year," he said, "but those challenges have brought us closer together and made us stronger. And we owe much of that to the students who stood up, spoke out, and reminded us of the values we strive to uphold." When Amara's name was called, she rose to a standing ovation. As she walked to the stage, she felt the weight of everything she had accomplished, as well as the immense potential of what lay ahead. In her speech, she reflected on the journey. "This year, I learned that change isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight," she said. "But I also learned that when people come together, when we listen to each other and stand up for what's right, we can create something powerful. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. And I can't wait to see what we all do next." As she stepped down from the stage, her parents embraced her, their pride evident in their tear-filled eyes. "We knew you were capable of greatness," Lydia said, "but seeing it unfold has been the greatest gift." Malcolm nodded. "You're a force to be reckoned with, Amara. The world better watch out." That summer, Amara continued to build on the foundation she had created. She spoke at local events, mentored younger students, and began planning for the next school year. Her story was featured in a regional news segment, and she received invitations to participate in leadership programs for young activists. Though she remained humble about her achievements, Amara knew she had made a difference. And as she looked toward the future, She felt a renewed sense of purpose. Northridge High was no longer just a school. It was a symbol of what could happen when people worked together to create change. And for Amara Johnson, it was only the beginning of a lifelong journey to make the world a better place. A year later, Amara stood on the steps of the state capitol, speaking to a crowd of thousands at a youth leadership conference. Her words carried the same conviction that had ignited change at Northridge High, but her vision had grown even broader. "This is our moment," she declared, her voice ringing clear under the midday sun. "Our chance to shape a future where every voice matters, where justice isn't just an ideal but a reality. Together, we can make it happen." The crowd erupted into applause, their energy a reflection of the hope Amara had inspired. Her journey had only just begun. Amara's story reminds us that change begins with a single voice and grows through collective action. Each of us has the power to stand up against injustice and create spaces where everyone is valued. What can you do in your community to foster equity and inclusion? Whether it's speaking up, educating yourself, or supporting others, your actions matter. Share your thoughts and experiences. Let's keep the conversation going. Together, we can inspire a ripple effect that transforms schools, workplaces, and communities into places of fairness and respect. The journey toward justice continues, and it starts with all of us.